from home. Welcome to the graduation of the Army National Guard Non-Career Recruiter Course, Class of 19006. I am Sergeant First Class Tanya Bushy from the Strength Maintenance Training Center, and it is my pleasure to serve as your Master of Ceremonies. 1st through 7th platoons are graduating our legacy course, which we have conducted for the last 5 years. 8th platoon is graduating our future course and curriculum. All graduates will receive the same professional awards, to include the Basic Recruiter Badge and the SQI4 identification. On behalf of the Strength Maintenance Training Center, we would like to thank all participants and graduates during this unique transition. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the entrance of the official party. The official party consists of Lieutenant Colonel Darren Horton, Sergeant First Class Jessica Hauser, Mr. Mark Parker, Mr. William Law, Mr. Brandon Arnold, Sergeant First Class Daryl Gibson, Mr. Michael Smith, Sergeant First Class Thomas Paul, and Mr. Mark Giese. Please remain standing for the national anthem and the invocation by Chaplain Keyfit.
Would you please join me in prayer? Our Father and our King, it is with one united voice that we here today raise up these men and women to you, asking that you do nothing short of a miracle, both in and through them. We humbly request that these men and women be blessed and be a blessing to others, that you would be with them in the intimacy of their homes, as well as the many unique challenges of their profession. Please, Holy Father, bless them with your wisdom for every situation that they are called upon. Bless them with a spirit of clarity to see each individual as you have created them and efficiently find a place among our ranks. And bless them with the miracle of faith that only you can. It is our prayer that the Army National Guard be a better place because of these professionals. Thank you for their instructors. Thank you for their cadre, and thank you for giving us the ability and privilege to serve. We do not take it lightly, and we praise you because of it. All glory and honor and praise be to you and you only. Amen.
Please be seated. Our guest speaker today is Lieutenant Colonel Darren Horton, the commander of the Illinois Recruiting and Retention Battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Darren Horton has been in the Recruiting and Retention Battalion commander for the Illinois Army National Guard since October of 2017. He has served in the Illinois Army National Guard since the 16th of May of 1992, when he enlisted as an infantryman. And after 5 years as a traditional soldier, he began his AGR career in October of 1997 as a Recruiting and Retention NCO. He attended the Strength Maintenance Training Center in March of 1998 and graduated April of 1998. Lieutenant Colonel Horton recruited for nearly 5 years and obtained the rank of Sergeant First Class. During his last 2 years of recruiting, he simultaneously attended Officer Candidate School. In June of 2002, he commissioned as a second lieutenant and became the basic branch officer recruiter for the Illinois Army National Guard. Following the assignment, Lieutenant Colonel Horton spent 10 years in various units and various assignments. He served as a training officer, Battalion AO, and the AGR manager, while also serving as a platoon leader, company commander, and Battalion S4. Also during this period, Lieutenant Colonel Horton had 2 combat deployments to Iraq, one as a platoon leader and one as a battle captain. He also had 1 combat deployment to Afghanistan, embedded in a Polish brigade as their S1 and S4. Lieutenant Colonel Horton returned to the Recruiting and Retention Battalion in January of 2014 as the enlisted strength manager and as the executive officer until September of 2016. After a 1-year tour as a brigade S1, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and took command of the Recruiting and Retention Battalion. Lieutenant Colonel Horton has a Bachelor's of Science in Paralegal Studies and an MBA in Human Resource Management. Some of his awards include the Bronze Star Medal, Meritorious Service Medal with a 4-leaf oak leaf clover, Army Commendation Medal, United States Navy Achievement Medal, NCOPD ribbon with the number 3, and the Combat Action Badge. He is also a graduate of numerous military schools to include the Command General Officer Stage College. Lieutenant Colonel Horton's achievements in the recruiting and retention arena include being awarded the Master Badge, 4-time top 10 recruiting and retention NCO, averaged over 3 enlistments per month in the 56th month as a recruiter, and improved the Illinois Army National Guard officer strength as a basic branch recruiter and as an enlisted strength manager and commander. Illinois has exceeded mission and end strength every year. He lives in Springfield, Illinois with his wife Laura of 23 years and has 2 children, Noah, 22 years old, who is an accountant for Archer Daniels Midland, and Zoe, who is a freshman at Illinois State University studying elementary education. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Lieutenant Colonel Horton.
Thank you, Sergeant Bushy. Are you ready to go home? Ready to go home and get that first enlistment? That's what we're really going home for, right? Family, they'll be there sooner or later. So, no, okay. I know recruiting. I love recruiting. This is a job that I have always loved. The Recruiting and Retention Battalion in the Illinois Army National Guard has always been my home. That's where I loved to be. That's where I felt most comfortable. That is where I felt like I got the most competition and the biggest challenge in my career. I have had 17 assignments in my 27 years in the military, from my enlisted assignments to my officer assignments, AGR assignments. Recruiting and Retention NCO, hands down, is the best job that I've done in the military. I loved it. I absolutely loved what you all are getting ready to go do. You'll have some flexibility. They'll give you this government car. You get this office. They gave me a pager back in the day. I think you guys get cell phones. Office partners for some of you. Loved it. Who here is this is your first AGR assignment as a recruiting and retention NCO? Okay, most of you. It was mine as well. And I'll tell you what, it can't be a better first assignment into the AGR program. It trained me or enhanced so many of my skills. And I wrote a few of them down. It taught me how to research. You've probably done a little bit of that over the last 5 weeks, AOC. It taught me how to influence others, an important skill set in any career field. It taught me how to communicate one-on-one with people, whether that be a 17 or 18-year-old kid or young adult, a parent, a school teacher, an administrator, a COI, a VIP. It also taught me how to do a presentation, talk in front of people, and it taught me some other things like how to handle rejection. And rejection stinks. There's no way around it, especially when it's a 17-year-old kid that rejects you. But that's just part of the job. It teaches you a little bit of humility. And you can carry that through any career that you do or any military assignment that you do. It taught me how to embrace change. And I think what it really taught me is that attitude is everything. Keep your chin up and drive forward. This job is important, but you always have to have that positive attitude. So I want to switch a little bit from my recruiting and retention NCO days to my recruiting and retention battalion commander days. I was on an NGB conference call yesterday, and they briefed that we're 2,313 soldiers short of making our 335,500 in strength for the National Guard Bureau. And I believe we have, I think someone said 153 roughly in here. So 153 times 18 enlistments, 2,754 enlistments sitting in this room ready to roll. We needed you a year ago, but we got you this year. We need you to go out there and knock that out for the National Guard Bureau. It's an important job. We're going up to 336,000 next year, so we're going to grow by 500 is the current plan. And I'm not tied in nationally, but that's what I'm hearing. So every one of your battalion commanders, command sergeant majors, will have a command philosophy, a top 5 most important, whatever it may be. But I wanted to share with you briefly what mine were. And that doesn't mean that that's what your battalion commander is going to push to you, but this is what I think is the most important in a battalion command for the recruiting and retention battalion. Number 1, discipline and Army values. If you don't have it, you're in the wrong career. You're certainly not going to make it as a recruiter. If you get a lot of flexibility, you get a lot of freedom, and you get a lot of time to make some poor decisions. Don't do it. Make good decisions out there. Be professional. Mission. I mean, that's what we do. If we're infantry, we charge a hill. For transportation, we drive a truck from point A to point B, deliver supplies. We're recruiters. We're going to be recruiters. We're going to get a number, and we have to hit that number. And if we like getting 180s on our APFT and our number is 16, we'll get a 16. But if we like to strive to get that 300, we're going to go above that number. We're going to exceed those standards, and that's how we do it. Soldier care. I preach soldier care a lot in Illinois, and what I'm really trying to say is training pipeline success rate. All those enlistments don't matter if we don't put a qualified soldier out there in a platoon somewhere to do a job. You have to take care of that soldier after you recruit them. Have to. Be a professional soldier. Probably my 5 years as a recruiting and retention NCO was those 5 years was the time that I was most detached from being a soldier. You're in an inherently different type of job than most soldierly professions. But maintain your professionalism, pass your APFT, be in the right uniform, at the right place, at the right time, keep your GSA clean, keep your office clean, all the little things that soldiers, especially NCOs, do on a day-to-day basis. Don't lose that touch. Don't lose that professionalism. And finally, soldier development. It's something we push big in Illinois, because if we can't find that next NCOIC, we're going to be in trouble. Every one of you, I would challenge you with that. Go out there and recruit, be successful, and strive to be that next NCOIC leading a team. There's a little thing I say in Illinois that says, if you can't make your own mission, how can I trust that you're going to be able to make a team's mission? And so that's one of the things I push. I don't consider people for promotion unless they can make their own mission. And I certainly don't consider them for NCOIC until they've proven that they can rise to the challenge, lead others, and get there. This is an important job, And it's a tough job, it's a rewarding job. I'll go back to saying this, I loved it. Very competitive, very challenging, and I loved it. So I hope you enjoy being a recruiting and retention NCO as much as I did. It's a great first start to your career, wherever your career carries you. And I wish you the best of luck and congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you for those words of encouragement. The instructors for 1st Platoon were Sergeant First Class Jessica Hauser and Mr. Anthony Goins. At this time, Sergeant First Class Hauser will address our platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
All right, First Platoon, it's been fun, right? It's only your job, remember that. First Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Sergeant Colby Adams. Sergeant William Adamski. Staff Sergeant Benjamin Aguirre. Sergeant Zachary Alder. Sergeant Sletana Allen. Sergeant Michael Amon. Sergeant Kylie Archer. Sergeant Michael Asher. Sergeant Justin Austin. Sergeant First Class Jason Belangi. Sergeant Ryan Barnes. Staff Sergeant Jeremy Barrett. Sergeant Sebastian Belk.
Sergeant Barrett. Great job.
Staff Sergeant Dylan Bennett.
Sergeant Bell.
Sergeant Christopher Bippis. Staff Sergeant Tyler Blaze. Sergeant Jermaine Renee Bowens. Sergeant Connor Brave. Specialist Stephen Breitling. Staff Sergeant David Bridgewater. The First Platoon Platoon Sergeant and Sergeant First Class Jonathan Brown. Sergeant First Class Brown will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Brown will address his platoon for the last time.
First Platoon, it has been an honor serving you as platoon sergeant for this class. The two things that I want to leave you with is when we started off 5 weeks ago, we came in here and we supported each other 110%, and we are still here. Cool? One of the other things I want to do is also let you know that resilience is going to take us farther than we ever have before. Strength, support, and being resilient, that's going to get us to the finish line 110% all the time. Cool? Thank you again.
The instructors for 2nd Platoon were Mr. Mark Parker and Sergeant First Class Basil Malloy. At this time, Mr. Parker will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
Second Platoon. I know you will. Everybody in this room who's wearing a uniform are part of that 1% that had the intestinal fortitude to go ahead and serve this great nation. But it all started with a recruiter that took a chance on you. After 5 weeks, each and every one of you have learned that some of you needed a waiver or a suitability review to be sitting in these seats right now because somebody took a chance on that tough packet. Don't forget where you came from. Second Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Sergeant Austin Buckaloo. Sergeant Clifton Butler. Staff Sergeant Robert Caldwell. Specialist Wayne Carlisle. Staff Sergeant Juan Campos. Staff Sergeant Nicholas Carey. Specialist Casey Cervantes. Staff Sergeant Jordan Charles. Sergeant Lane Collins. Staff Sergeant Nicholas Connery. Sergeant Shelby Constacio. Sergeant Zachary Cook. Specialist Kelly Dalton. Staff Sergeant Anthony Davenport. Staff Sergeant Angelica Davis. Staff Sergeant James Dawes. Sergeant Asatu Jallo. Staff Sergeant Patrick Dobson. The second platoon sergeant is Sergeant First Class Matthew Craig. Sergeant First Class Craig will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Craig will address his platoon for the last time.
First of all, I want to say thank you for making this assignment pretty easy. You guys did a great job, and I don't think anybody got in trouble, all right? Also, I want to say it's a privilege to meet all of you, and it's a privilege to get to train with you for the last 5 weeks. Mr. Parker used the words great nation. So I want to challenge you, everybody else in this room, go out there and find the next bunch of soldiers that are ready to defend this great nation. Congratulations on your success. Best of luck on your journey.
The instructors for 3rd Platoon were Mr. William Law, Mr. Travis Lamb, and Sergeant First Class Tanya Bushy. At this time, Mr. Law will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
Good morning, 3rd Platoon. Good morning. Hey, so those last 5 weeks has been really interesting. You all showed that you have the intellect to be able to do this job correctly at the highest GPA in the class, right? Now remember, when you're out there, to not abandon all the things that you've learned here at the schoolhouse. When you're talking to your applicants, we're talking to these young men and women, make sure that you actively listen. That's listening to understand and not listening to respond, right? You guys have been amazing this whole time with very little incidences or anything like that. But, you know, we could talk about how great you guys are all day. Let's get down to the real reason why we came here. 3rd Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Sergeant Zachary Douglas. Corporal Alexander Dvorak. Specialist Latasha Ellis. Staff Sergeant Kyle Emmel. Specialist Hannah Farrell. Staff Sergeant Austin Fox. Staff Sergeant Johnny Vieira. Sergeant Israel Figueroa. Specialist Christy Gallant. Sergeant Richard Garcia. Sergeant Nicholas Guion. Staff Sergeant Justin Goff. Sergeant Douglas Hall. Sergeant Ryan Hammonds. Sergeant Misty Harris. Sergeant Laurie Haskins. The 3rd Platoon Sergeant is Sergeant First Class Tara Eilers. Sergeant First Class Eilers will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Eilers will address the platoon for the last time.
Good morning, 3rd Platoon. It has truly been an honor and has been a true privilege to serve with all of you. It's been a really humbling experience to choose recruiting as my last assignment in my career. I'm really glad that I'm starting this journey with all of you, and I hope that we stay in contact and encourage each other along that way. However, we talk about sentimental remarks all day. Let's get down to the real reason why we're here, which is to graduate. Congratulations.
The instructors for 4th Platoon were Mr. Brandon Arnold and Mr. Robert Herpel. At this time, Mr. Arnold will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
Good morning, board. Before I get started, 19-006 to all of you, congratulations and best of luck to you. 4th Platoon. Day 1, we started off with 3 simple rules. Rule number 1, learn something new every day. Rule number 2, have fun. Rule number 3, be better than you were yesterday. Keep those 3 rules moving forward. Learn something new every day about your applicant, about your schools, about yourself. Strive to be more intelligent than you were the day before, whether it's personally or whether it's academically. Rule number 2, have fun. This job is extremely rewarding, but it can be a drag. It can make you not want to do it at certain times. You have to learn how to handle rejection. You do that by enjoying the small things, having fun doing it. And rule number 3, be better than you were yesterday. When that applicant tells you no, when you get that late night phone call from one of the NCOICs sitting in the back asking you, what have you done for me lately? When you haven't made enough phone calls and you're behind on mission, strive to be better than you were the day before. Make things happen, and that's what will lead you to success. 4th Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Staff Sergeant Martika Hayes. Staff Sergeant Brandon Hellman. Sergeant Jared Hensley. Specialist Charles Herkus. Specialist Michael Hillman. Sergeant Elliot Hogue. Sergeant William Holt. Staff Sergeant Gregory Hotchkiss. Specialist Tyler Howells. Specialist Danica Hubert. Staff Sergeant Jared Hudson. Sergeant Benjamin Hull. Staff Sergeant Sean Isola. Staff Sergeant Carrie Jackson. Sergeant David Jackson. Staff Sergeant Randy Jackson. Specialist Zachary Jackson. Specialist Griffin Jacobs. Sergeant Miguel Hernandez. Specialist Ashley Johnson. Staff Sergeant Craig Johnson. The 4th Platoon Sergeant is Sergeant First Class Lear Jelks. Sergeant First Class Jelks will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Jelks will address her platoon for the last time.
All right, 4th Platoon, I have 5 things for you. 1, be assertive. 2, be disciplined. 3, have compassion. 4, have empathy. And 5, always have a plan to kill everybody in the room. Cool?
The instructors for 5th Platoon were Sergeant First Class Daryl Gibson and Mr. Howard Goff. At this time, Sergeant First Class Gibson will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diplomas.
Morning, 5th Platoon. 3, inside joke, abagoo, abagit. Always have fun, okay? This is a fun job. So again, congratulations and good luck. 5th platoon, prepare to graduate.
Sergeant First Class Joseph Hall. Staff Sergeant Michael Keach. Staff Sergeant Nicholas Kenton. Sergeant Tara Kinzer. Staff Sergeant Kylie Krister. Sergeant David Kitchen. Staff Sergeant Thomas Cleefish. Staff Sergeant Stephen Knichel. Sergeant Nigel Coring. Specialist Kirk Kevspert. Staff Sergeant Carly Lane. Sergeant Lash LaRue. Sergeant Nicholas Lavender. Sergeant Sean Lehan. Staff Sergeant Robert Lichardi. Staff Sergeant Laura Maloney. Specialist Marianne Mann. Sergeant Joshua Mayberry. Specialist Riley McCracken. Sergeant Mason McGuire. Specialist Carson Milor. The 5th Platoon Sergeant is Staff Sergeant Amy Jo Kibler. Staff Sergeant Kibler will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Staff Sergeant Kibler will address the platoon for the last time.
Fifth Platoon, congratulations and good night, Little Rock.
The instructors for 6th Platoon were Mr. Michael Smith and Sergeant First Class Griffin Dickerson. At this time, Mr. Smith will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
Good morning, 6th Platoon. All right, 5 weeks ago we come here. Some of y'all had deer in the headlight looks. Some of y'all still might. All right, but we started with 24 and 24 graduating. That is a great credit upon you as a class. You come together and did make that happen, okay? You're going to be the face of the Guard in your communities. So remember that. We've talked a lot about ethics and different things through the 5 weeks, okay? I'll leave you with this. Over the last 5 weeks, you've identified strengths and weaknesses. I want you to keep developing those strengths and weaknesses into superpowers, okay? Don't ever quit. All right, with that being said, 6th Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Sergeant Tyler Hinson. Staff Sergeant Lance Meyer. Sergeant Jacob Moore. Sergeant Marcus Morgan. Staff Sergeant Michael Morris. Staff Sergeant Todd Morton. Staff Sergeant Andrew Mulkey. Sergeant Chase Myers. Specialist Keith Nemeth. Sergeant Matthew Niesink. Sergeant Vance Norton. Sergeant Lauren Ogburn. Staff Sergeant Robert Oswald. Staff Sergeant Pagan Montalvo. Sergeant Christopher Page. Sergeant Benjamin Parker. Staff Sergeant Daniel Pearson. Specialist Daniel Pearson. Sergeant Patrick Perry. Sergeant Taylor Pope. Staff Sergeant Christopher Porras. Specialist Travis Pruitt. Sergeant Jalahandra Purdy. The 6th Platoon Sergeant is Sergeant First Class Jeremiah Olson. Sergeant First Class Olson will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Olson will address his platoon for the last time.
'24 showed up, '24 graduated.
The instructors for 7th Platoon were Sergeant First Class Thomas Paul, Mr. Everett Stevens, and Mr. Heath Strickland. At this time, Sergeant First Class Paul will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
Good morning, 7th. We look good. This is the end. This is graduation. The end of rubrics. The end of talking about Texas. The end of tests, long nights and papers. I'm proud of each and every one of you, and I look forward to seeing your accomplishments in the future. 7th Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Staff Sergeant Joseph Robich. Sergeant Buddy Rogers. Sergeant Rosanna Rowland. Staff Sergeant Jeremy Roothouse. Sergeant First Class Thomas Sala. Sergeant Edgar Sanchez. Staff Sergeant Nicholas Sanders. Staff Sergeant Alan Schulte. Specialist Jasmine Sagara. Staff Sergeant Jason Selnow. Sergeant Malcolm Selma. Staff Sergeant Scott Shaw. Sergeant John Smith. Sergeant Richard Stott. Sergeant Heather Swales. Sergeant James Taylor. Staff Sergeant Robert Tench. Sergeant Alan Tenorio. Sergeant First Class Shaka Thabatia. Sergeant Gregory Thomas. Sergeant J.C. Townsend. The 7th Platoon Sergeant is Sergeant First Class Michael Runyon. Sergeant First Class Runyon will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Runyon will address his platoon for the last time.
Platoon, it's been a long 5 months, but we did it. It's been an honor, and you are the best platoon.
The instructors for 8th Platoon were Mr. Mark Giese, Miss Virginia Pena, and Sergeant First Class Sean Griffin. At this time, Mr. Giese will address his platoon for the last time. The awarding of the diplomas and badges will follow. Please hold your applause until all students have received their diploma.
Morning, dude, how you doing? Y'all ready to roll? All right, I'll make this short. First, I'd like to thank Sergeant Griffin and Ms. Pena for all their assistance during this course. I know we all did our best to make sure that you leave here with the skills and knowledge that you need. I'm going to leave you with 3 quotes this morning. First one comes from Robert Collier. Mr. Collier said, "True success is not any one event. It's the small things done daily." All right, so remember that when you're out there on the street. Update your box. Contact your COI and VIP. Visit your schools. Do those things daily, and you will be a success. Second one comes from our former President Thomas Jefferson. He said, "For a people who are free and mean to remain so, a well-organized and armed militia is their best defense. Make no mistake, you will provide that militia." Last comes from the Lord Jesus Christ, Book of Matthew. Treat others as you want to be treated. Cool? Don't ever let your applicants become just a number. They're people. Treat them with dignity and respect. 8th Platoon, prepare to graduate.
Sergeant Amelia Gonzalez. Sergeant Antoinette Trim. Sergeant Cody Truitt. Sergeant Michael Vargas. Sergeant Ashton Wallace. Sergeant An Wong. Sergeant Rashawn Ward. Staff Sergeant Lance Washington. Sergeant Jonathan Watson. Sergeant Stephen Weber. Corporal Walter Whitaker. Staff Sergeant Tramal Williams. Specialist Daniel Wilson. Sergeant Tyler Wada. Sergeant Justin Woods. Sergeant Alicia Wright. Staff Sergeant Robert Wonderly. Sergeant Kira Wymore. The platoon sergeant for 8th Platoon is Staff Sergeant Tyler White. Staff Sergeant White will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Staff Sergeant White will address his platoon for the last time.
I'm the last soldier. So, in the words of the great Sean T. Griffin, have a great guard day.
At this time, we will recognize the soldiers that made the Commandant's List by graduating with an academic grade in the top 20% of our class. If I call your name, please stand. Sergeant Ryan Barnes. Sergeant Austin Buckaloo. Specialist Casey Cervantes. Staff Sergeant Jordan Charles. Sergeant Shelby Contasio. Staff Sergeant Angelica Davis. Staff Sergeant James Dawes. Sergeant Zachary Douglas. Sergeant First Class Tara Eilers. Specialist Latasha Ellis. Staff Sergeant Austin Fox. Staff Sergeant Johnny Fiera. Sergeant Ryan Hammonds. Corporal Zachary Harms. Sergeant Misty Harris. Staff Sergeant Jared Hudson. Sergeant First Class Joseph Hall. Staff Sergeant Michael Keach. Sergeant Tara Kinzer. Staff Sergeant Stephen Knichel. Sergeant Lash LaRue. Staff Sergeant Laura Mahoney. Sergeant Marcus Morgan. Staff Sergeant Andrew Mulkey. Sergeant Lauren Ogburn. Staff Sergeant Robert Oswald. Staff Sergeant Louise Pagan Montalvo. Staff Sergeant Jeremy Roothouse. Sergeant First Class Thomas Sala. Sergeant Edgar Sanchez. Staff Sergeant Nicholas Sanders. Sergeant Amelia Gonzalez. Staff Sergeant Lance Washington. Staff Sergeant Tramel Williams. Sergeant Alicia Wright. Sergeant Cara Wymore. You may be seated. At this time, we will recognize the soldier with the highest academic average, or as we call it, the Distinguished Honor Graduate. This class's Distinguished Honor Graduate is Sergeant First Class Tara Eilers with an overall academic average of 99.17. At this time, we will also recognize the soldier with the highest Army Physical Fitness Test score, or as we call it, the Iron Soldier Award. This class's Iron Soldier is Sergeant First Class Jeremiah Olson with a total score of 300 points on the APFT. The student first sergeant for Sergeant Young Hall is Sergeant First Class Bollingy. Sergeant First Class Bollingy will be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. He will now address his class for the last time.
Good morning, graduates. All right, first of all, I want to thank you. I want to congratulate you for completing the course. Many of our classmates failed to complete the requirements for graduation and are not sitting with us today. All right, so give yourself a round of applause for that. Next, I want to give a special thank you to Sergeant First Class Brown, Sergeant First Class Gregg, Sergeant First Class Allers, and Sergeant First Class Jones. They all did an outstanding job as platoon sergeants and made my job easy. All right, give them a round of applause. Right, now that we have completed this course, we have the challenge to go out into the world and recruit, right? So I challenge you to do 4 things every day. Number 1, go to work every day and give 110%. Don't just show up to work. Go to work every day and give it all you got. Number 2, do some type of physical fitness every day. Don't let something simple like PT be the downfall of your career. Number 3, live the Army values every day. That will keep you out of a lot of trouble. Real simple. Number 4, be sure to make good legal, ethical, and moral decisions every day. All right? If you do those 4 things every day, I have no doubt that everything else will fall into place. Okay? I wish you the best of luck in your careers. Now let's go to work. Thank you.
The Student First Sergeant for Lexington Hall is Sergeant First Class Hall. Sergeant First Class Hall will also be receiving a Certificate of Excellence. Sergeant First Class Hall will now address his class for the last time.
The unfortunate thing about speaking last is after 18 people is everything's basically been said. I appreciate the opportunity to be a student first sergeant, and I couldn't have done it without the great platoon sergeants that I had. When we got in trouble, everyone did what they're supposed to and showed up on time. So good luck and be safe going home. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, the graduates will now have 5 minutes to choose someone to pin their newly awarded badge. Graduates, you have 1 minute remaining. 1 minute remaining. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the class of 19006 Army National Guard Non-Career Recruiter Course graduates. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the exit of the official party.